Feels real good. Yes, yes. This is Celebration Spiritual Center. We're all about joy up in here. And we recognize that it's through the vibration of joy that we can call forth anything that we want. You got to recognize and realize and find the joy that's within you, that's always there, in spite of what you see outside of you, in spite of what's going on in the world, in spite of what somebody is saying on the news. There is a joy that lives within you. And when you tap into that, there is nothing outside of you that can stop you. There is nothing outside of you that can limit you. There is nothing outside of you that can do any of those things. But you got to know that the joy lives within you. You got to know that that joy dwells within you. If you look for it outside of you, see, the outside world is fleeting. The outside world changes all the time, all the time. So if you're looking for it outside in this fleeting, changing world, sometimes you're going to get it and sometimes you won't. But if you recognize that it's within you, it's always been with you, it's always been inside of you, you will have it wherever you go. Regardless of the condition that you're experiencing, the joy will still be right there with you. Yes, yes? Well, good morning, Celebration Spiritual Center. How are we feeling? Well, it's so good to see all of you. Welcome to our first-time guests. It's so good to have you here. And it's so good to be here on our Independence Day weekend, and we're celebrating our individual freedom because we recognize that freedom is the basis of our experience, that we don't have to wait for somebody to tell us that we're free. We don't have to wait for a declaration or an emancipation to tell us we're free. But we recognize that that has always been the truth of our life. So we're going to dig right in. I'm excited about this series. We always try to do something a little fun in the month of July. You know, we've done different movie series, sci-fi and spirituality. We've done animated movies. Last year, this time, we did The Wizard of Oz. And so this year, it's The Gospel of Awesome. Yes. Based on this awesome book, Kid President's Guide to Being Awesome. Robbie Novak, as you've heard within the synopsis for this series, is an awesome young man, a 12-year-old boy who has experienced many challenges in his life. He has brittle bone disease, and he's broken many, many bones, but he still loves to dance. He's not afraid to dance. He's not afraid to play football, right, and do all of these things. But beyond that, he has a wisdom. I call him a little Buddha. Beyond that, he has a perspective on life that I think supports us all in living. And one of the things that I thought about, one of the things that he says in the book, it came back to my mind a couple of weeks ago, or about a week ago. I went to see Sting and Peter Gabriel at Jones Beach. Awesome, awesome concert to see those two legends. And I found myself doing like everybody did. You know, when the show started, Peter Gabriel opened the show and Sting came right behind him, and I have my phone out and I'm Snapchatting and I'm Instagramming and I'm trying to take pictures and video, and I want to capture all of these moments. And I was doing what everybody else was doing. We were all doing it, right? And we got to a moment where Sting talked about the tragedy in Orlando, and he dedicated the song Fragile, which is my all-time favorite Sting song. And he's playing those famous chords, and something said, wait, you're not going to be able to understand or experience or remember this moment. If you're standing there with your phone, you're not experiencing the moment. And I heard Kid President's words, where he says, life is what happens when you put your phone down. I heard his words, this wise 12-year-old, and I just turned my phone off and put it in my pocket. I said, I'm not going to experience this moment again. These two 60-plus-year-old legends will never tour together again, and you know, they're old guys. They're still in their prime. They're doing well, but we don't know how much longer they'll tour at this level. Let me take this all in. And then I took his advice. He says, what we need to do is take brain pictures, right? That's how we can learn to be present and in the present moment. And so this is just the first chapter, y'all, in Kid President's Guide. He starts with, life is what happens when you put your phone down. That's the title of the first chapter, teaching us to take brain pictures. And there's some other things in that first chapter. He writes, don't focus on presence, focus on being present, right? And then he also says, celebrate today. Every breath is a big deal. Let's take that in. As we're talking about this joy, as we're talking about being here in Celebration Spiritual Center, every breath is a big deal. Oh my God. Every time we open our eyes for this 24-hour reset is a big deal. And at the end of the chapter, there's a question that he asks us that we're going to focus on today. It says, does this make the world better? He was focusing and talking with his brother-in-law who helps him with the videos about this idea of, well, how can we make the world a better place? We want to heal the world, man in the mirror, all these cool things. How do we do that, right? And he said, well, people should just stop doing things that don't make the world better. That's all. And so it brought up this question, this litmus test for how we can begin to live our lives. Does this make the world better? And I thought it was awesome, and I didn't mean to do that on purpose, but I thought it was awesome to focus in on this question, because I think for us as adults, what it allows us to look at is, I think we sometimes have trouble looking at this idea of inspired action. Right? Because we have so many things that are going on our planet and our world and our country, and we're like, I want to do something. Something needs to happen. I want to vote for the right person. I want to help the right person. I want to do something because I feel helpless, but I know I can do something. And we're an action-oriented society, but I think before we can start doing, there's some questions we need to ask us which lead us to the being, because as Emily Cady loves to say, I'm a broken record on this quote because I love it, doing is secondary to being. We got to get to this being place first. And so this question helps us to get into the being place. Does this make the world better? And so when we think about inspired action, it reminded me of something that I use with most of my coaching clients. You probably know this question because I use it often. Abraham Hicks offers a question that I love as a litmus test for anything that I'm about to do. Was this idea born of inspiration or desperation? Powerful. Right? Now let's just imagine what that looks like in the real world. See, an inspired idea, right? If you get excited about something, you say, I want a bowl of ice cream, right? You get excited. You realize there's something about ice cream that brings joy to your life, that brings a smile on your face, that lights up your taste buds. And so it's inspired. And then you find whatever, you go wherever you want to go, you get some ice cream, and it's good, and you enjoy it, right? But a desperate idea, the thing about a desperate idea, how I like to see it is, that's when your back is against the wall. How do we react when our backs are against the wall? Most of us aren't violent, but if your back is against the wall, you might kick, you might punch, you might scream, you might use some words that you wouldn't normally use if your back is not against the wall and you're feeling free and all is well. And so this is what that idea of, is this idea born of inspiration or desperation? This, I think, takes us into looking again at this question of, does this make the world better? Now, for the past few weeks, we've been talking over and over again about, in the message, collateral imagination. And last week's message, this idea that as all of these unwanted things are showing up on our planet and in our country, it's a call for love, right? A Course in Miracles, every act of fear is a call for love. But then we get into the moment. That's wonderful. That sounds good. It feels good. But what am I supposed to do? And one of the things that I think is important for us to understand, even as we're in this doing place and asking ourselves the question, does this make the world better? I'm hearing something from A Course in Miracles that I think is important. A Course in Miracles teaches us that the ego always speaks first, right? If you've been in Pastor Yolanda's class, you know this. It's always loud and it's wrong, right? Yes, yes. The ego always speaks first. It's loud and it's wrong. The Course says this in the text. The ego always speaks first because it is capricious and does not mean its maker well. Now, what do we mean by capricious? Let's just break that word down. It just means it's random, right? You know how do we treat random human beings in our lives? Where, sometimes they're hot and sometimes they're cold and sometimes they're in joy and sometimes they got an attitude and sometimes they're complaining, right? Random people like that, and you usually say, I'm not dealing with that person, because you never know what you're going to get. That's the ego. The ego always speaks first because it's capricious and does not mean its maker well. So the first thing we need to understand is, even when we ask this question, let's listen to the voice. The voice of love is kind. That's how you know the voice of love, right? The voice of love is consistent, yes, right? And the voice of love is never going to ask you to do anything that you don't already have the ability to do within yourself, right? It's not going to ask you, if you're not a medical doctor, it's not going to ask you to go to Africa and become a doctor and help people, right? It's not going to ask you to do that because that's not who you are. That's not your profession. You're not trained for that. But it's going to ask you to do something that's within your own power and ability to do right now. See, and we judge that because we think we have to become a superhero in order to do anything to change or affect the world. To make the world better, we think we have to become Superman, Wonder Woman, and then we can make the world better. But love recognizes that who and what you already are Superman. You already are Wonder Woman. And so as your being is what trumps the doing, it calls you to your beingness and says you're already wonderful and amazing and powerful and intelligent and full of wisdom, and you have access to wisdom. Use that here and now where you are. And so as we ask this question, we can look at this question a bunch of different ways, right? Does this make the world better? You could ask yourself that question before you post on Facebook. Will this make the world better if I post this Facebook rant? You can ask that before you send or respond to an email. Will this make the world better if I respond or send this email? Now, we have to understand vibration, right? We talk all the time about energy and vibration, right? And so while everything in truth is neutral, it's about the vibration that we add to it. Right? You can send an email, telling someone that maybe they made a mistake or helping them in some way to correct themselves. You can send that in love, and you can also send that in a way that would be critical, that wouldn't actually make them feel better, and in turn wouldn't make the world feel better, right? You could ask yourself that question even before you have a conversation with someone. Will this make the world better? It reminded me of a beautiful acronym that I'm sure we're familiar with, but it's an acronym for the word think, right? You can ask yourself these 5 questions. It's another way to look at, will this make the world better? Does this make the world better? Think, is it true? Think, is it helpful? Think, is it inspiring? Right? Think, is it necessary? And finally, think, is it kind? Because if it's not true, if it's not helpful, if it's not inspiring, if it's not necessary or kind, it doesn't make the world better. Sounds too simple, doesn't it? The truth is simple. Yes. Love is simple. It has to be. Because it has to be easily accessible to a child and to a 90-year-old man. That's why it's simple. And think about all of the ways that life would change as we begin at every level of society to ask this question. Before certain bills are even presented in Congress. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it kind? Certain bills wouldn't even show up. We wouldn't even be talking about bathroom laws in the South. Right? I'm just saying certain things just wouldn't even come up. Because it's neither true, helpful, inspiring, necessary, or kind. Right? Now, again, this at times can sound too simplistic, right? This sounds like Pollyanna, pie in the sky type of thinking. So what do we need to do? I say we need to bring it down a little lower. Because as we talk about, does this make the world better? And of course, each of us are individual people in the world that on a certain level, what we do, we can't affect what happens in China. We can't affect what happens in sub-Saharan Africa. We can't affect what's happening in Brazil. We can't even affect on a certain level what happens in Orlando or recently in Turkey. Let's bring it closer to home. Instead of asking, does this make the world better, ask yourself this question: does this make my family better? Whatever this idea is, whatever it is that I'm about to do, whatever it is that I think I'm going to say, and again, we got to first just clear and make sure who's speaking first. Is it love or the ego? Is it that random friend of yours called the ego that never means well to you, its maker? Or is it the voice of love? And then you ask yourself, does this make my family better? Or does this make my workplace better? Does this make my neighborhood better? What it is that I'm going to do, this thought that I have, this thing that I feel I must do. Again, as we are so action-oriented, And we get caught up in the action and forget about the being, right? We just want to do something. Will this make my neighborhood better? Does this make my body better? You're a microcosm of the macrocosm that is the world. Does this make my body better? Really simple litmus test. You don't have to shame or blame yourself. I talked about ice cream. Ain't nothing wrong with ice cream. Right? But you may need to ask yourself, based on your personal situation or your belief system, does this make my body better? In this moment, does it? No shame or blame. You can ask yourself, does this make my school better? Does this make my relationship better? See, sometimes there's certain things in relationships you just don't even need to say. Right? Now, that doesn't mean bury it down so it turns into resentment and you end up saying it later. Right? Right? We know about that. But we recognize that sometimes even when we're well-meaning, right? This is why I love that question, is it necessary? See, because sometimes we think we know what someone else should be doing. You can't. You can't create in their life experience. You can't know what's best for somebody else. And so this is why this litmus test is great. Well, is it true? Is it inspiring? Is it helpful? Is it necessary? And is it kind? And if you can't be kind, go away, get yourself back into kindness, then come back, because then you'll hear from the voice of love. See, the only reason the voice of the ego speaks first most of the time is because we're in the vibration that the ego loves. And so we attract all of that. If we're in the vibration of fear, we can only hear fearful thoughts. If we're in the vibration of worry, we can only hear worrisome thoughts. If we're in the vibration of meanness or anger, we can only hear thoughts that match that. So please hear this. I'm not saying don't speak at all. Don't have conversations with your partner, right? But you got to recognize that if you speak out of that vibration that you're in, of fear, doubt, worry, shame, blame, guilting, wanting to be right. I love to say it. Do you want to be right or do you want to be free? It's your choice. Does this make the world better? And so as I was thinking about this idea of action and being action-oriented, I was also reminded of something that Abraham says that I thought was powerful as it relates to action. And I believe this is in the Law of Attraction series, the audio series. And this is like old school Abraham from back in the 80s, right? Which I love listening to those old Abraham recordings. But Abraham offers us something to think about, that because we live in a physical environment, right? And we manipulate the world, and so we think that this is the world, right? When actually this is the effect, right? That which we cannot see is the world, right? And everything else shows up outside of ourselves. That's why this world changes. It's the only reason this world changes, right? Because it's an effect of cause. And of course, this is how we can manifest anything that we want. This is why the law of attraction works. This is why we're able to, call forth money and lovers and experiences and trips. And we can go to school if we want to, on a free ride if we want to, full ride if we want to. We can call forth anything that we want, right? Because of this. But because we've gotten it twisted, right, and most of the world tends to live from this place that life is lived from the outside in, that's why we get into this place of, oh, I must do something, I must do something. But what Abraham says to us is that actually what we're called to do is to work from the inside and actually visualize, think, be in that being place and feel what it feels like. Think about what it feels like to experience the thing that we want, and then we use the physical world to enjoy it. And so when you think about this idea of does it make the world better, and you ask that question first, what it should inspire you to is these inspired ideas of thinking and feeling and then visualizing and imagining, what does the world look like in harmony? What does the world look like where we actually experience oneness across the board? What does this world look like when we experience light? What does the world look like when we experience freedom for all? What does the world look like? What does the world feel like when we experience equality for all? What does the world look like when we no longer have to individually celebrate independence for certain countries because we all celebrate as a global family our independence, our freedom? What does that look like? And as you sit in that place, again, it's a vibration. As you sit in that vibration, by law, this is all the law of attraction is, you must attract, magnetize unto that thought things that match it, ideas that match it, places to go that match it, people and a spiritual center that matches it. But we got to be willing to ask that question. We have to be willing not to listen to the voice of the ego. Because that's all we do most of the time, right? If you think about it, right? When we experience unwanted things in our lives, let's be honest, we listen to that first voice. The one that was loud and wrong, but felt good in the moment because we were addicted to it. It's kind of like, life is a game, right? We're in this game, but it's kind of like we're in a play. And you have a choice which script you want to pick up. And, growing up, we learn the complaining script, right? We learn it from our parents or family members or whoever, right? Growing up, we learn the fear script, right? As soon as this thing shows up, we go into fear. Growing up, we learn the I'm going to cuss you out and tell you off script, right? And we pick it up. And if you're honest with yourself, and maybe it's just me, but I've experienced this in my own life so much, I can feel myself going to that place where it's like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do because this is what I've seen. And it's like I just pick up the script and I know the scene because I've seen the scene, and I just begin to recount and recite and act in ways that I've seen in my life, vibrations that I've seen. You have a choice now. You're grown. Yes. You have the choice now of which script you want to pick up. It's the same conversation. Listen to the voice of the ego or listen to the voice of love. Ask yourself the question, does this make the world better? Does this make my relationship better? Does this make my family better? Does this make my experience at work better? Or does it make me feel good for a little bit right now? That's the other okie doke, right? You listen to the voice of the ego, and it feels good for a little bit, and then you feel bad again, right? It didn't actually solve anything, right? It's a temporary fix, right? Similar to how our addictions can look in physical ways, right? It's a temporary fix. And then you find yourself searching yet again for some other way to be angry, right? So does this make the world better? Is it too simplistic? It's not. And I think we can all see why. And what I understand is that I so often just say, what we must do is follow the joy. As we ask this question, does it make the world better? Does this make the world better? And we put ourselves in this joy vibration that we sung about today. Follow that. Ask yourself, this is Howard Thurman, right? Where is my greatest joy? Where is your greatest joy? If you find that place, that is the thing that's going to make the world better. If you're familiar with Power versus Force by David Hawkins, he talks about this scale that's similar to the emotional guidance scale that we learned with Abraham. But what he talks about, and it's powerful because it can be tested, is that based on the scale, and collectively humanity, we're just around 200, which is the level of courage. Based on this scale, there are many people that are at the lower end of the scale. They're depressed, they're angry, they're confused, they're apathetic. And then you have people that are on the higher end of the scale that we would call enlightened. And it's the balance and the power of that higher, and I don't mean lower or higher in the sense of rank, right? But it's the balance of the higher scale that actually keeps our planet moving forward. That actually the vibration of love, although because the way the news is set up, the news is only designed to make you feel bad. It's only designed to tell you bad news. That's what it's created for, right? And I'll give you an example about that in a second. But if we recognize that, then what we know to be true is that if this earth is still spinning, right, if we're still alive, if there's still more than enough air for all of the billions of people that are on this planet, that's the force of love, right? And we have the choice to then look for those things that actually are affirming, that are life-giving, to look for those things that are joyful. Follow the joy. Now, I'm reminded in Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, he tells this awesome story, right, of this idea of how the news is designed to keep us in fear. This is not conspiracy because I don't live in that place, right? But he talks about a time when there was a flu epidemic in New York, and everybody was getting sick. And week by week, it just got worse and worse and worse, and more people were getting the flu. And the headlines were talking about the flu. And this was just the newspaper. There was no social media. I guess there was radio back then. But the way that we get, news now, right, that CNN, constantly negative news, right, we don't have that. We didn't have that back then. But the news kept reporting it, and more people were getting it. And finally, the mayor of New York, he went to the newspapers. He said, I got to get this thing under control because it's becoming an epidemic. He went to the newspapers and said, stop reporting about it. What happened? They stopped reporting, and the numbers went down, and people got well, and they went back to normal, right? So this is not about a conspiracy that, the news is designed, we don't believe in evil. Go back to the superstition series last year, Superstition Ain't the Way, right? There's no source of evil. We don't live in that place. But we recognize that as the news is a collective force where we are looking to, right, and putting our attention on, if we take that information, we're focusing on that negative information, we're focusing on that bad information, and we continue to see and create and recreate. But there are actually sources now, thankfully, on the internet. That's the Good News Network. And it's amazing and surprising to see that, yes, we recognize that there's tragedy happening on the planet. We recognize that there's death and transition happening on the planet. We recognize that there are earthquakes happening on the planet. And we also recognize that there are beautiful, loving acts that are happening on the planet. We recognize that there are people, I posted on Facebook for those of you that saw it, there's this brother, I believe he's down in Texas, that created these mobile showers for the homeless. Like, that's happening too, right? And the more you begin to look for those things, you follow the joy, maybe that'll inspire you. You follow the joy and you understand, wait, there is good in the planet, and goodness is still running through the veins of human beings. Everybody's not a terrorist. Everybody's not choosing to blow themselves up for some ideological reasons. That's not true. But if you turn on the news, it seems that way, right? If you open the paper, it sounds like the world is just, is going to crumble in the next couple of seconds, right? Even when we think about our presidential election, we've had some pretty bad presidents in our country's history. The country's still here. Yes. See, we got to put our mind on these places. We're having this all is lost conversation about somebody that hasn't even been elected yet, that might get elected, but I keep hearing the all is lost. Oh no, the world is going to be so terrible. We've had pretty bad presidents in the past. And still, we're here. And still, we're celebrating tomorrow the 240th birthday of this country, right? Perspective. One man trumps 240 years. One woman even trumps 240 years. And then when you think about even collectively, and I love to think about this in the context of as an ancestor of enslaved Africans. When you think about when segregation ended, right? We have the Civil Rights Act of '64. We have the Voting Rights Act in '65. Essentially, it was from that moment that sort of freedom really happened, right? Because there was the end of slavery, but then there was Jim Crow, right? And then, the end of Jim Crow, look and think about all of the positive, all of the good, all of the amazing things that have happened in the span of about 60 years. In spite of the hundreds of years of slavery. See, this is our mindset. We think that we think that because there were hundreds of years of slavery that success cannot happen until hundreds of years have passed. But think of all of the things that African Americans and the descendants of African slaves have been able to accomplish on this planet, in this country, in spite of the hundreds of years of oppression. Now, I'm not saying that everything is perfect and, we have more places to go, of course. But again, it's this perspective of following the joy, right? Are we going to keep retelling the slave narrative over and over again? Does this make the world better by continuing to watch slave narratives? Does this make the world better by continuing to re-traumatize ourselves over and over again, collectively, everybody on every side of the story? But we can follow the joy. And maybe what makes the world better is to begin to tell the story so that our young people can see the good that is happening on the planet. That people that look like them, what they've been able to accomplish in spite of the circumstances. Does that make the world better? So we're going to continue this month to take the awesome inspiration of this young 12-year-old brother, Robbie Novak, aka Kid President, and understand that we can make the world awesome. That we can be more awesome. And if anybody knows it, he knows it. As he's experiencing so many challenges in his life and he's able to inspire us here in Brooklyn, I think we can inspire a few people. So one of the things that we're going to do this month, we're going to take this idea of treat everyone like it's their birthday. Next week, we're going to have a box for birthday cards. And I invite everybody to go out, get as many cards as you want, 1 or 2, doesn't matter. Get funny cards, get serious cards, get a card that you would love to get, right? And sign it with love and put it in the birthday box. And at the end of the month, everybody's going to get a birthday card. We're going to treat each other like it's our birthday. Think about how you treat people when it's their birthday. You're in a restaurant, you don't know them, but you sing happy birthday along with the waiters and waitresses, right? We can make the world more awesome and we can make our community more awesome. Just with this small, simple, little gesture, only costs a few dollars to get a birthday card. So I encourage you, go out, have fun with it. Funny cards, silly cards, loving cards, inspiring cards, empowering cards, thank you cards that celebrate each and every one of us just for being here. Just for being here on the planet. Because if we're breathing air, that's a big deal. With that, I invite everybody to stand. I say it every day. It's a good time to be alive. Yes. It's a great time to be alive. I recognize that each and every one of us chose to come here on this planet, to incarnate at this time, to bring our light to this planet at this time. And so that's why I'm not worried about the darkness. I'm not worried about the fear. I'm not worried about this candidate or that candidate. I'm not worried about decisions that are happening across this planet, because within me is a joy. Within me is a knowledge of who and whose I am. I recognize that each and every one of us, we are the children, we are the sons and daughters of love itself. And so if we are the sons and daughters of love itself, it is time for us to call ourselves by our names. And we ask ourselves, within ourselves, love, does this make the world better? And we listen, we wait for the voice of love to guide us. We wait for the voice of love to remind us of who and what we are. We wait for the voice of love to remind us of what we can do right where we are. We let the voice of love remind us that we actually don't need a whole lot of money to be great. We don't need any money to be great. We don't need any money to be loving. We allow the voice of love to remind us that we are transformational figures. We allow the voice of love to remind us that we are here to change and transform and be the example of love and light right in our workplace, right in our homes, right in our relationships, right in our schools, wherever we may be. The light of love is calling us. Mother, Father, God, I am grateful and thankful for all the people in this space, in this place, and within the sound of my voice, because I know who they are. I know that there is nothing outside of them, outside of you, that can dictate who and what you are. There is no experience outside of you that can change who you are. Even as sometimes we may choose fear, love is always waiting. Even as sometimes we may choose worry, love is always waiting. Even sometimes as we may choose complaint, as we may choose to live in doubt, love is always waiting. And so we turn to the voice of love. We turn to the reality of love, and we let it inspire us to do amazing things on the planet. This week, we will look for ways to be awesome. This week, we will think in ways that allow us to experience the awesomeness of life. We are so grateful and thankful for our brother Robbie Novak and all of his inspiration. And so we release this word with joy and thanksgiving. And together we say, Amen, Amen. Ashe. Ashe. And so it is. And so it is. Thank you, God.